Alrighty, thanks y'all. Thanks for joining. I know it's a Monday. This has been a workshop that's been really requested with our internal team of writers, and so I figured it'd be helpful to open it up. As always, this will be recorded, so everyone will be able to access this afterwards, and it'll be available on our YouTube. I always like to start with kind of a disclaimer before any of our workshops. This is just from my personal experience, things that I've observed. Luna has been around for 6 years, so I've written a handful of reviews myself, read many reviews myself. So this is all just from my personal observations. And before we kind of get into the bits of this workshop, I wanted to start by talking about why do we write reviews? Of course, some of us might write reviews just because we like sharing our thoughts, and maybe we have a Substack where you share your album reviews, or maybe you just enjoy going to concerts and sharing your experience. But there's a little bit of a deeper level behind that. We're writing reviews for a couple different reasons. First and foremost, we're informing readers. You know, your job as a journalist is to share information, contribute to a conversation. Maybe it's sparking a discussion. Maybe it's holding an artist accountable for their performance and stuff like that. And lastly, of course, it's still for fun. Even if you are a full-time writer for Rolling Stone and this is your career, should be for fun. I imagine most of you, this is something on the side. Maybe you're in college, maybe you're early on in your career, and you write for a publication on the side. I always try to remind people working in music or entertainment is such a privilege. It's not brain surgery, so it should ultimately be fun as well. So today we're kind of going to break it into what are the key components and structure of reviews as a whole. And then we're going to focus on song and album reviews, and then concert reviews, the value of negative reviews, and then have a little activity at the end for those that are here with us. So it should be pretty quick, and we'll dive into it. Starting with kind of the basic backbone and structure of a review. You're breaking it into three different sections for the most part, like any sort of essay or article, of course. Although I think people really underestimate the value of your intro and kind of the background section of it. So we'll get into it. Your intro, you always want to have some sort of background and context on the artist and what you're talking about. Whether you're writing a album song or a concert, you want to give people a little bit of context, a little bit of background. The background doesn't need to be as basic as they were born in this year in this state. You know, of course, it can be a little bit more rich than that. But not everyone that's reading your review is going to be familiar. They might not be a fan of the artist. This might be what's putting them onto the artist to begin with. So giving relevant context, maybe leading up to this release or this tour, like what have they been up to? Is this an artist that's early in their career? Is this their debut song, or is this, you know, the first time we've heard from them in years? Have they just come off of back-to-back touring? You know, we'll get into the more specifics for each type of review, but definitely want to do your research and have some introduction. Your body paragraphs are kind of when you're getting into the meat and where you're sharing your opinion, you're having your analysis of the music and the performance and the lyrics, and this is where you're like weaving in your opinion as well. So you're having a mixture of research and facts, and then also your analysis and opinion. And this is where you can also include outside information or quotes or anything like that. Maybe you've gotten to interview the artists themselves, or you have access to a press release, or you went to the concert and you recorded some of the banter they had with the crowd. This is where you can weave in some more personal and rich aspects as well. And your conclusion, of course, is going to be your overall impression. Did you like the project? Do you recommend the project? And I also like to include, if possible, a kind of what's next for the artist. If it's about a song or an album review, you know, are they going to be on tour? Or do they have another release coming up soon? Or if they're in the tour, can you catch them? Do they have remaining dates left? Where are they up to? Just for those that are really enjoyed the review and maybe now they're interested in the artist, what is kind of the next step that they can connect with them? Can they go catch them on this tour? Can they look forward to an album that's coming soon? What's kind of next? So now we're going to break it into song and album reviews, and we'll get into concert reviews. So for song and album reviews, you're going to be following those key components that we talked about and taking it on a deeper level. So your context can range so much, and this is where doing the research is so important. Maybe you're writing a song on an indie artist who you can find very little about online, and your only source is kind of like your interview with them. And maybe you're writing a review or a concert review on, you know, Taylor Swift or wherever. So always including context of where this stands with their discography. Is this their debut song, their second album? Is this single that's releasing prior to the album release. When was the last time we heard new music from them? Is this a significant release? Have they disappeared and come back? You know, did they have another side artist project? Like, this is where I think the background is so, so important, and you can do plenty of research, pulling from what you can find, maybe from the making of the project, whether you have access to a press release, if you're like on assignment, working with a publicist, or if not, what can you find from other published interviews so far? I always like to, when possible, including a little bit of insight into the creative process. I feel like it kind of humanizes that process and allows a reader to better connect. If I listen to an album and then I read an interview with an artist and I learned about how they recorded this album in their bedroom of their childhood home during like a summer at home or something like that, I just feel like I'm able to connect more and you have a more like human experience to it. And maybe there's some more technical things, like did they work with a certain producer? Did they try out a new creative process or anything like that? See what you can pull from online, see what you can pull from what resources you have, and going from there. And then your opinion, your opinion isn't as simple as I like this album or this is a great song, bring more to that. Like, did you have certain tracks? What lyrics stood out? Why did you like the track? How did it compare to previous music if we've heard from them? Like, does this show a growth in their sound, or is it a completely different direction from what we've heard from them? I also think it's helpful in reviews to call out other artists that it might remind you of, because as a reader, it helps you kind of immediately contextualize and understand what this song or album is like. So if you are writing a review on some super random small like indie pop band, if you're naming some larger artists that people might know, that immediately allows them to be like, oh, okay, cool, like this is the vibe. And then yeah, bringing your opinion and your personal listening experiences as well. So did this meet your expectations? What were you expecting? Was this an album that you were really looking forward to, and did it totally like hit it out of the park, or were you a little bit disappointed? Which we'll talk about negative reviews in a little bit. And maybe what's the perfect listening environment? How did you listen to it the first time? Is this an album where it takes a few lessons to understand, or is this an album where you're immediately like, yes, I get it? Like there's music has such a range of emotions that it can bring about. So don't feel afraid to bring in that personal aspect. It is a personal review. And of course, this varies maybe publication by publication, who you're writing for and what they prefer, but point of view of the review is to bring in your opinion, but based off of research and also including facts. So then concert reviews. I think it's totally worth noting the prep for concert reviews, because that'll help you kind of set yourself up for success and be able to enjoy the show itself. I think a lot of stress for concert reviews comes from, I want to be present, I want to enjoy the concert, but how am I supposed to write this review? So this is where prep comes in. Research, exactly what we just kind of said for that intro. You can pretty much draft your entire intro before the show. Anything about the background info on the artist that we've already talked about, or the tour, like, are they in the middle of this giant US tour? Is this following up a smaller opening tour that they had? Is this their first headlining tour? Does this venue have any significance? Have they played in the city before? All of that you can prepare ahead of time. You can have like the first part of your review ready to go before you even go. The hack that I always like to share is the set list. If you can access the set list ahead of time to prep your notes or review, that makes such a big difference. For those aren't familiar, Setlist FM is a great resource. It's an online website where sometimes the artists' tours or shows their set list will be posted for. Not always, of course, if it's like a smaller artist, maybe not there. If you can't find the set list online, you can obviously do a little bit of, kind of researching and understanding and thinking like they're probably going to play their top 5 Spotify songs at the very least or something like that. So I usually will like write it down on a note what their set list is, or at least what songs I know I think they're going to play, so that when it comes time to the actual show, I already have that kind of prep for me. So here's the next point of setting up your notes. You kind of want to set up an outline if you're taking notes on your phone or even a notebook, just to have it so you're almost filling out an outline. So your track by track thoughts, what's the vibe of the crowd? What's the vibe of the artist? Is the artist like having talk with the crowd? Is there banter and kind of potential vibe throughout the entire evening? So I would literally break my notes down by like having each individual song that I know they're going to play, or at least I think they're going to play, and then literally have a section that's like vibe of crowd, vibe of artist, what is the artist wearing, what is the stage like anything like that to make your process a little bit easier so you can enjoy the show when it happens. Which brings to the next part, during the concert. So you've kind of set yourself up for success with that little outline. So you want to be taking notes on any key details like the set list and song selection, what's the energy of the performance, if there are any crowd interaction, but also shows us so much more than just how the artist sounds, you know, really look like? What does the stage look like? Is there a cool set design? What's the quality of it? And touching on things outside the artist itself, like I've mentioned, the overall crowd environment, venue environment, and anything like memorable or unexpected. If possible, it's nice to kind of just like record bits and pieces if you want to try and weave in a quote or just like jog your memory of a certain part or any personal observations. Something that I also used to do when I like went to a show that was really, really good, I would literally vlog myself afterwards and just talk to myself about how much I enjoyed it. So that way, like when I go to write the review, whether it's later that night or the next morning, I can look back and be like, damn, like I really fucking love that show. Like that energy might not have translated to my notes. So when in doubt, take videos, or it's like if you don't know the song that's playing, just take a video. You'll be able to match it up later. So set yourself up with success for taking this, prepping your notes and having a little outline, but then also having a bunch of video content you can reference. Okay, the art of the negative review. This was something that was requested as well, which is a great thing to touch on. So, you know, your review should be authentic, but, you know, not every song needs to be the best song of the year. Not every concert needs to leave you with chills. We don't need to over exaggerate everything. But also, how can you professionally address a less than positive review, especially when you're working with the artist team? So, you got a press pass to go cover the show from the artist team, and show wasn't that good, or you're working alongside the publicist to do an article about the album, but you're not feeling the album. That's totally okay. There's a way to go about it. So writing negative reviews, they definitely have value, but there's a way to focus kind of on constructive criticism and still be respectful. You're a journalist. Not everything needs to be the best piece of media you've ever consumed in your life. So focusing on constructive criticism rather than just saying, I don't like this album or this album sucks. You know, what is it that you don't like about it? What are the specific elements? Are you feeling like the lyrics just weren't hitting, the melody didn't match? Like, what is it specifically? Because chances are you're not going to dislike every single thing, which if you do, then that's fine. But try to hone in on what you aren't really feeling. And, you know, there's a way to balance back. So maybe I love the melody of this album. I love the melodies in this track, but wasn't really feeling the lyrics. So I couldn't connect to the lyrics or something like that. You want to be using objective language. You know, it's not a personal attack on the artist. So it's not like, I fucking hate this Still Woozy song or Still Woozy album because he sucks. It's like, which first of all, I love the new album, but you know, you could say this was a departure from the previous albums that I really liked. This new song doesn't really resonate with me as well. And if you feel like you're qualified or you actually have thoughts on it, you can offer suggestions for improvement. So, you know, looking forward to the next project, I would love to have more deeper lyrics or whatever it is that you're not feeling. And throughout it, there's a way to maintain a respectful tone. You know, you can acknowledge positive aspects of music performance, or maybe there are just certain songs you don't like. So there's a way to weave that in, like we kind of said, track by track, if you're writing the album review of like, I really enjoyed X, Y, and Z, but didn't feel like the album like was as strong with X, Y, and Z songs or whatever. And emphasizing it's your personal opinion. Yes, it's a review, we know that. But instead of saying this song sucks, once again, it's this song didn't resonate with me as much as previous releases or as much as I hoped, or yada yada. And you're ultimately offering alternate perspective for readers who might enjoy that new artist style or their vibe. So you can say like, I really enjoyed, I'll stick with the Still Woozy's example, even though he has such a unique sound, but I really enjoyed previous Still Woozy's album. This album was a little bit more for people that are fans of X, Y, and Z, you know. For a little workshop, I know there's only a handful of us here today, but also if you're watching online, which I imagine most of you will watch afterwards, you can go through this. Maybe you can just drop in the chat like yes or no. We'll go through this one by one, but what information would you include in an album review? So I'll go by each one. If you're watching this later, you can think to yourself, and if you're here live, you can just chat yes or no. So starting with the top one, the album was recorded in a cabin in Montana. Would you include that in an album review? Yes or no? Pull up the chat. Yes, we got a yes. We got another yes. Yeah, exactly. It's giving context to the creative process. I think, as I mentioned before, it's awesome to include as much as about the creative process. If you have further insight to how they made that project and maybe how it impacted it, as probably recording in a cabin in Montana was an intentional decision, include it. Next one, the artist is wearing a green shirt in the album cover. Would we include this? This is a tough one. Unsure. It sounds like we're unsure. That's okay. This would be one I would say, yeah, correct answer. No, unless it's relevant. Exactly. If you are talking about the description of the album cover and you're telling us what is in the album cover, then sure, like the artist is wearing a green shirt with the cabin in Montana, which they recorded the album at. If you're talking about the creative side of it and you're talking about that visual part, yes. If it's included truly in just like a one sentence like that, while you're talking about everything else, no. So it's all about context. Third one, the lead single is the best track of the album. Would you include that in an album review? I would say yes, but we would phrase it differently, right? We want it to be a little bit more objective. So we would probably phrase it like the lead single is the strongest track of the album, or however you would phrase it. Okay, fourth one, the artist got a pet fish during the making of the album. Yes, no, what do we think? Yes, good point, Gigi. I would initially I'd say no, unless this was something that was specifically shared. So all going back to context of did this for some reason play into the making of the project? When they're in their cabin in Montana, did they get a pet fish that they inspired one of the tracks? Sure. Once again, like the artist is wearing a green shirt part, if it's just thrown in there and has no impact on the album or the sound or the making of it, no. And then the last one, I like listening to the album when I grocery shop. This kind of goes back to like talking on the personal side of things and bringing in your opinion. Yeah, I would say, yeah, I would say, the purpose of a review is to give your personal take. And I think the listening experience can be really crucial to experience an album. So if you want to phrase it as, the first time I listened to this album, I got in my car and went for a drive, and it really was the perfect driving album or whatever like that. I think that's totally good. Okay, we're gonna do this one more time, but with a concert review because it's a little bit different of a vibe. Starting with the first one, the show did not sell out. I feel like we were very quick to always mention if shows did sell out. So do we think we would include that it didn't sell out? Kind of a tricky one. I would say for this one, probably not, but yeah, be more specific. So are we mentioning that because it impacted the vibe of the show? We're usually saying the show sold out because it was packed and there was lively energy. So are we mentioning that it wasn't as popular because it felt empty, because there was just a weird vibe with the crowd? Like, give more context as to why you would share that information. We don't want to say like ticket sales were bad, but you would say like, oh, you were surprised to see that the crowd was a little bit smaller than expected given the size of the artist. And then maybe further than that, you give context. It was a Tuesday on a rainy day and blah, blah, blah. So give context. Second, the opener had great energy. If you're writing a review on the headliner, do we feel like we can touch on the opener? I would say yes, 100%. I think it's a great part of the background. I think it helps set the scene, or vice versa. Maybe you want to see the opener and you mentioned about the headliner. It is part of the show. It is part of the experience. It helps shape the vibe of the evening as a whole. So I definitely think it's worth mentioning it. Sometimes it helps to set the scene. Obviously, you don't need to make the whole thing about it. I think one or two sentences is perfect. Number three, I loved the acoustic version they did of an old song. Yes, 100% yes. That's giving your personal aspect to it. That's giving context into what was so different about the show, what was special. They did a different version. They did an acoustic version of the song, and you loved how they did that. And of course, you can phrase it with a little bit more rich. But yes, 100%. Fourth one, the artist butchered their most popular song. So it's kind of tying into what we mentioned about writing a negative review. This one, I would say yes. But yeah, 100% what you said, Catherine. Yes, but phrase it differently. So maybe you would say they were a little bit pitchy on this song or something like that. You want to give, we're sensing a common theme here, context. Why are you saying they butchered it? Like, give us more. Was it just that one song? Was there vocals off the whole night? Yada, yada. And then lastly, I wore Doc Martens to the show. Will we include that? Yes or no? I feel like I'm including a lot of trick ones in this. That's on purpose. Yes, no, and less relevant. Are you describing what other people are wearing? Are you just kind of setting the scene? I personally love touching on what people are wearing. If it is the type of show an artist that has a specific culture around it, and you guys know what I mean. If there's some artists where you're like, every fucking person there was wearing their Doc Martens and their little tote bag and had their little like what you know what I mean? Like if you're setting the scene, that's great. But as we've mentioned, if it's just thrown in there, maybe not. So that's the last question. And all that to say is it's all about context. You can include the most random things if you make it not random. And you can also not include things that seem pretty straightforward, pretty basic. It's giving context to the particular setting, what type of rider you are, and what you like to lean into. So before we do any questions, kind of takeaways. So good reviews, of course, is about your opinion, but you can set yourself up to success with requiring a lot of prep and research, pulling with what you have access to online and from your personal experience. You know, you're finding a mix of this research and facts, but then also your opinion and background info is all supposed to be weaved together to create a cohesive body of work. And we touched on negative reviews. You can totally write constructive reviews while still being respectful. They're great value. There's a way to phrase things so it's not just you shitting on something. And then lastly, if you feel like you're in a rut or you're having a hard time finding your style or you just want to switch things up, read reviews from other writers and publications you like. The best part, or one of the most important parts to getting better at your craft is consuming that media. You know, you want to find maybe your thing for every album is you do a track by track dive in, or maybe when you go to shows, your thing is really focusing on setting the scene outside of just the music itself. You want to figure out your style, and you're going to do that through writing and then consuming. So that's all I have. If anyone has any questions, let me know. This will be accessible. I'll put this deck and the YouTube link as well. I'm going to stop recording, but for those that are here right now, I'll stay on for a little bit if we have any questions. And thank you to those that came live. I appreciate y'all. I'm going to stop recording.